In the beginning of the movie, we see Arthur Fleck getting ready for work. As he watches his reflection in the mirror, he puts 2 fingers in his mouth and twists them up and down a few times, while a single tear runs down. Later on the street, Arthur dances and promotes a sign of the shop that has hired him. The sign was stolen by some kids, who ran away immediately. Arthur chases them through the city and finds them waiting in an alley, where the kids proceed to smash the sign on his head, and after he falls to the floor, they start kicking and punching him. Later, Arthur goes to see his therapist. He laughs for a couple of seconds. The therapist asks him if he's been working on his journal. He hands it to her, saying he's been using it as a journal, but also as a joke diary, because he's pursuing a career in stand-up comedy. Once therapy is over, Arthur takes the bus. The kid sitting in front of him is staring, so he starts making funny faces for him. After getting off the bus, he stops by the pharmacy to pick up his medicine before going home. Inside the building, he checks the mailbox, then goes up to his apartment where he lives with his mother, Penny Fleck. After cutting up her food for her, he joins her on the bed so they can watch the Murray Franklin talk show together. Arthur imagines himself in Franklin's audience, where the host hears him and asks him to stand up. Arthur introduces himself and shares how he takes care of his mother. The host then asks Arthur to come down, and Arthur does so while enjoying everyone's applause. Arthur's body was covered in bruises the next day at work. His co-worker Randall approaches him, and after telling him he's heard about the beating, he decides to give Arthur his gun. Another co-worker, Gary, interrupts them and tells Arthur that their boss is looking for him. Arthur visits his office, where he receives a new complaint about his disappearance and failure to return the sign. Arthur clarifies that he was the victim of a robbery, but his boss finds it hard to believe him. He then proceeds to scold Arthur, who remains silent and smiling. But after that meeting is over, he goes outside to kick a trash can in frustration. Later that day, Arthur gives Penny a bath. She keeps asking about the letters because she thinks Wayne was a good man who wouldn't want to see them live like this. Arthur tells her not to worry about money because his stand-up show will make it to big clubs soon. After having put his mother to bed, Arthur watches a movie and practices with his new gun. When a song begins to play on the TV, he starts dancing to it while pretending to talk to a girl. But he accidentally shoots the gun and makes a hole in the wall. His mother wakes up and asks about the noise. He tells her it's just a war movie on TV. The next evening, Arthur attends a stand-up show to write down some notes. Upon returning to his place later, he continues to work on his notes. The following day, Arthur is working as a clown in a hospital, entertaining the kids. During his performance, his gun falls to the floor. He hurries to pick it up and asks the children to keep it a secret. However, later in the evening, during a phone conversation with his boss, the man became enraged over the incident. Arthur tries to convince him the gun was just a prop, but his boss doesn't believe him and tells him, Randall said he tried to buy a gun off him last week. Arthur got fired from the job. In the subway, there are 3 guys in suits bothering a young woman. When Arthur suddenly starts laughing, the woman gets up and leaves. The 3 of them approach him. They removed his wig and bag and asked why he was laughing. However, when he attempts to explain and retrieve his belongings, they seize him, punch him, and then toss him onto the ground, kicking him. This time, though, Arthur defends himself. He takes out his gun and shoots 2 of the men. The 3rd one runs away and leaves. Arthur follows him out and shoots him when they reach the stairs. Arthur rushes out of the station. Later, he returns to his apartment building, knocks on Sophie's door, and as soon as she opens it, he goes inside and kisses her. The next day, Arthur goes to his workplace to pick up all his belongings and hears his co-workers discuss the news of a clown shooting 3 men in the subway. They also try to offer him some words of sympathy, so he tells everyone it was his gun that did the crime. Before leaving, Arthur hits the punch clock, which falls to the floor and breaks. Back in his apartment, after he takes his last few pills, Arthur joins his mother to watch TV. Thomas Wayne is in the news because his company's employees were murdered. In response to a question about the murderer, he explains that the murderer's use of a clown mask reflects his cowardice and desire to conceal his identity. Some days later, Arthur is seeing his therapist again. He tries to tell her he finally feels like he exists, and people are starting to notice, but she interrupts him to tell him the government has cut their funding. So this is their last meeting. Later at night, Arthur is behind the scenes at a bar, waiting for his turn to present his stand-up routine. Sophie is among the public. When his turn arrives, he takes the stage, erupting into uncontrollable laughter. When he finally manages to read some jokes from his notebook, they fall flat. After the show concludes, he leaves the bar with Sophie. As they walk together, he notices that the newspapers have featured a clown face alongside the news of the murders. This sight delights him, especially when Sophie remarks that the clown is a hero. After having dinner with Sophie, he goes back to his apartment, where his mother has fallen asleep in front of the TV. He wakes her up and sends her to bed. She tells him she's written a new letter before entering her room. Arthur decides to grab the letter to read it, and he finds out he's Wayne's illegitimate son, which makes him furious with Penny. She's afraid of his reaction, so she locks herself in the bathroom and speaks from inside, explaining that she and Wayne were in love, but they had to keep appearances, and she couldn't say anything because she signed some papers. The next day, Arthur reads the newspaper on the train and finds a picture of the Waynes, which he tears off and saves in his notebook. Moments later, he visits the Wayne mansion, where a young Bruce Wayne is playing in the garden. When Arthur comes closer, the kid approaches the gate and starts performing magic for him. Arthur reaches through the gate and puts his fingers in Bruce's mouth to make him smile. Alfred abruptly interrupts them, pushing Bruce aside and threatening to call the police. Arthur tells him he's Penny's son, and he wants to see Mr. Wayne because he knows everything. Alfred laughed at him. When he makes it home in the evening, he finds paramedics taking his mother to the hospital, and he gets in the ambulance to go with her. A few hours later, 2 police officers approach Arthur as he waits outside the hospital. They want to interrogate Arthur about the subway murders. He tells them that his gun was just a prop before going back to his mom. In the room, Arthur switches on the Franklin show on TV, and he feels hurt when he sees clips of his stand-up routine being used to mock him. Later on, when he's back in his apartment, the TV news shows that people are rioting while wearing clown masks because Wayne called them clowns. Arthur decides to join these protests, and when he gets there, he takes advantage of a fight between cops and civilians to sneak inside the building Wayne is currently in, which is a movie theater. He steals an employee's uniform and puts it on to gain access to the auditorium, where he watches the movie while closely monitoring Wayne. When he leaves the room, Arthur follows him into the bathroom and confronts him about Penny. Wayne claims she was crazy, but he never touched her. Arthur was actually adopted. Arthur doesn't believe this and becomes angry, which prompts him to laugh. Wayne then punches him before leaving. The next day, he gets a call from Franklin's production asking if he would like to appear in the show, which he accepts. Afterward, he takes the bus to Arkham State Hospital, where he asks for his mother's file. The clerk confirms she was psychotic and hurt her child, but he can't give the file to Arthur, so he steals it and runs away. The document verifies Arthur's adoption. The next day, while visiting Penny, he tells her his life is a comedy and not a tragedy before suffocating her with a pillow. Later on, Arthur is at his place getting ready for the show. After practicing his speech, Arthur dyes his hair green and begins applying his makeup, only to have the doorbell interrupt him. He grabs a pair of scissors and hides them in his pants before opening the door to find Gary and Randall, who come to visit him after hearing of Penny's death. Randall is worried because the cops have been interrogating clowns, and Arthur has his gun. Arthur responds by stabbing him with the scissors and punching him. Gary freaks out and wants to leave. Arthur lets him go without hurting him, because he was the only one who was ever kind to him. The cops find Arthur on the street after he changes into a new suit and leaves for the show. He starts running away and enters the subway, which is filled with people going to the protests with clown masks. The police chase after him, and when Arthur snatches a clown mask from a man, he starts a fight. The cops accidentally shoot a civilian, and when the subway stops at the station, everyone rushes towards the officers, allowing Arthur to escape unnoticed. Moments later, he makes it to the studio. While waiting in the dressing room, Franklin comes by to check on him and asks for a clean show. Arthur accepts and promises his clown makeup isn't political. He also asks to be introduced as Joker. He was called to the stage, where he entered dancing. Arthur attempts to crack a joke about death, only to receive scolding. Subsequently, he confesses to being the subway killer as he has nothing left to lose. After a long speech about the system failing, the little people, and how Franklin is the same for having brought him to the show to make fun of him, Arthur shoots him on camera. The police cut off the transmission, arresting Arthur. As the police car transports him away, he observes the riots in the streets, which are populated by individuals donning clown masks. He's admiring the beauty of the scene when an ambulance unexpectedly crashes into the car, rendering him unconscious. The protester who had been driving the ambulance comes out and finds Arthur, so with the help of other mask wearers, they take him out of the car and put him on top of the hood. Meanwhile, the Waynes are leaving a theater when a protester follows them. After telling Wayne he deserves it, he shoots him and his wife, leaving little Bruce alone with the bodies of his parents. Returning to Arthur, he wakes up to find the protesters clapping and whooping for him, so he climbs up on top of the car and performs a small dance for them. When he notices the blood coming out of his nose, he uses it to draw a bigger smile around his mouth. A few days later, we discover that the Arkham State Hospital has admitted Arthur. While the therapist checks on him, he starts laughing and later leaves the room.